I said no to babysitting my sister's kids, so she dumped them in a taxi to my address anyway, except the driver got it wrong. 3 days later, I got the call that destroyed her. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. That call wasn't a tragedy, it was a reckoning. For years I had been the invisible structural support beam for my sister's collapsing reality. But when the police found my niece and nephew freezing in a construction zone because she couldn't be bothered to verify an address, I didn't rush to cover it up. I let the evidence speak for itself. My life is built on grids, load-bearing calculations, and absolute precision. As an architect in Chicago, I don't deal in approximations. If a beam is off by an inch, the roof collapses. My sister Michelle lives exclusively in the collapse. She calls herself a lifestyle influencer, but really, she is a chaos merchant who packages her dysfunction with a filter and sells it as spontaneity. The friction point happened on a Thursday. My home office was silent, the only sound the hum of my hard drive and the scratching of my stylus on a tablet. I was finalizing the schematics for a 40-story commercial retrofit. The deadline was immovable. Then my phone vibrated. It was Michelle. She didn't ask how I was. She simply informed me of her requirements. She had been invited to a brand retreat in Aspen. The buy-in was $15,000, which she called an investment, and I called a hemorrhage. She needed me to take her children, Sophia and Ethan, for the weekend. I didn't hesitate. I explained it clearly. I had a site inspection on Saturday morning. It was a structural safety review for a condemned property the firm was acquiring. I could not have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old with severe asthma on a hazardous job site. Michelle didn't hear my schedule. She only heard my refusal to facilitate her ambition. She called me jealous. She said I didn't understand the pressure of her career. She told me I was punishing her for being successful. I didn't argue. I didn't try to justify my employment. I simply repeated the word no, hung up, and went back to my blueprints. I assumed that was the end of it. Rational people, when denied childcare, find an alternative. But Michelle isn't rational. She views boundaries as suggestions and silence as consent. Saturday morning was brutal. The temperature in Chicago had dropped to 10 degrees below zero with the wind chill. The lake was steaming a gray void against a white sky. I was in my home office preparing my gear for the site visit, double-checking the safety specs. My phone sat on the desk screen dark. At 9:15 it rang. It wasn't Michelle. It was a local area code I didn't recognize. I answered, expecting a contractor or a client. Instead, a male voice identified himself as Officer Miller from the Chicago Police Department. He asked if I was the aunt of Sophia and Ethan. My blood didn't run cold, it stopped. The officer explained that a patrol unit had found 2 unaccompanied minors wandering near a fenced-off construction zone on South Lake Shore Drive. They were freezing. The boy was in respiratory distress. They had a piece of paper with my name on it. The officer asked for my address. I gave it to him. 847 North Lake Shore Drive. There was a pause on the line, heavy and terrifying. Then the officer said, "Ma'am, we found them at 847 South Lake Shore Drive." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Michelle hadn't found a babysitter. She hadn't stayed home. She had put her children in a rideshare while she rushed to the airport, and she hadn't even bothered to check the cardinal direction on the destination. She had sent them into the winter alone to the wrong side of the city because checking a GPS pin would have taken 3 seconds she refused to spare. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I grabbed my coat and my keys. This wasn't a family emergency anymore. This was a crime scene. The drive to the south side was a study in desolation. As I sped down the highway, the luxury high-rises of the Gold Coast gave way to industrial skeletons and vast frozen lots. The heater in my car was blasting, but I couldn't feel my hands. When I pulled up to the coordinates, the officer had given me the reality of the situation, stripped away any lingering sense of familial loyalty. It was a condemned lot surrounded by chain-link fencing that rattled in the wind. There was nothing here but concrete ice and the flashing blue lights of a patrol car. I parked and ran toward the lights. I didn't run with panic. I ran with purpose. I found them in the back of the squad car. Sophia was wrapped in a police blanket, her teeth chattering so hard she couldn't speak. Ethan was curled against her, his face a terrifying shade of gray. He was wheezing, the high-pitched struggle of an asthma attack exacerbated by the brutal cold. Seeing them like that, huddled in the back of a police cruiser because their mother couldn't be bothered to type 4 extra letters into a rideshare app, something inside me fractured. For years, I had been the architect of my sister's safety net. I was the one who fixed the errors, paid the late fees, and smoothed over the jagged edges of her negligence. I told myself I was helping. I told myself I was keeping the family structure intact. But looking at Ethan's blue lips, I realized I hadn't been helping. I had been enabling. By constantly catching the plates she dropped, I had taught her that gravity didn't apply to her. I had built a reality where she could toss her children into the void, confident that I would be there to catch them. That delusion ended today. The paramedic waved me over. They were loading Ethan onto a stretcher. He needed a nebulizer immediately. His oxygen levels were critically low. Officer Miller approached me, notepad in hand. He asked if I had contacted the mother. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I chose the truth over the cover-up. I told him no. I told him I had no idea where she was, only that she had a flight to catch. I handed him the piece of paper they had found in Sophia's pocket, the scrap with my name and the wrong address scrawled in Michelle's handwriting. I didn't call Michelle. I didn't warn her. I didn't give her the chance to spin the narrative or come up with an excuse about a glitch in the app. I climbed into the back of the ambulance with the children. I held Sophia's freezing hand and listened to the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen mask over Ethan's face. This was no longer a family misunderstanding. This was a documented case of child endangerment. And as the ambulance sirens wailed, cutting through the frozen air, I decided I wasn't going to be the fixer anymore. I was going to be the witness. The ambulance ride was a blur of medical jargon and the high-pitched whine of sirens. I sat next to Ethan, stroking his hair, whispering that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure it was true. Sophia sat opposite us, her eyes wide and terrified, still wrapped in the police blanket. At the hospital, the triage nurses were efficient and kind. They whisked Ethan away to a treatment room and a nurse gave Sophia a warm blanket and a juice box. I filled out paperwork, my hand shaking slightly. Contact information. Medical history. Insurance. I knew it all. I had filled out these forms for school registration, for summer camp, for doctor's appointments Michelle couldn't make. Then my phone rang. Michelle. I walked out into the hallway to answer. "Where are you?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "I've been calling you for an hour." "We're at the hospital," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Ethan had an asthma attack. The police found them." "The police? Why were the police involved? You're so dramatic, Brianna. I told you I sent them to your place. It was a simple miscommunication." "A simple miscommunication. You sent them to the south side, Michelle. To a construction site in sub-zero temperatures. Ethan could have died." "Don't lecture me. I'm the mother here. And you know what? This is your fault. If you had just agreed to watch them like a normal sister, none of this would have happened. You made me do this. You forced me to find alternative arrangements because you're so selfish with your time." I listened to her rant, to the familiar cadence of her blame shifting. It was a masterclass in distortion. In her mind, she wasn't the mother who abandoned her children. She was the victim of my unavailability. She wasn't responsible for the danger. I was responsible for not preventing it. And then the parents arrived. Susan and Richard burst into the waiting room like a two-person storm front. They didn't ask about Ethan. They didn't hug Sophia. They marched straight to me. "What did you tell the police?" my father demanded, his face red. "I told them the truth," I said. "That I didn't know they were coming. That I didn't know where Michelle was." "You idiot," my mother hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've exposed us. You've embarrassed your sister. She has a brand to protect. If this gets out, she'll lose her sponsorships." I looked at them, really looked at them for the first time in years. They weren't worried about their grandchildren. They were worried about the optics. They were worried about the narrative. To them, Michelle was the star, the golden child whose shine must be protected at all costs. I was just the stagehand who had dropped the curtain at the wrong moment. They checked Sophia for bruises, not out of concern, but to see if there was visible evidence. They asked if the police took photos. They started strategizing, planning how to spin this, how to frame it as a funny misunderstanding, a quirky travel mishap. But as I watched them, I realized something fundamental. They weren't just protecting Michelle. They were protecting themselves. They were protecting the illusion they had built, the myth of the perfect family with the perfect daughter. And I was the threat to that myth. I looked down at my phone. I had recorded the call with Michelle. I had the police report number. I had the text messages. "I'm not dropping it," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not covering for her this time. You will if you want to be part of this family, my father threatened. Then I guess I'm not part of this family, I replied. And for the first time, the threat of exile didn't scare me. It felt like liberation. Tyler arrived 40 minutes later. He had flown in from a tech conference in San Francisco, still wearing a tailored suit that looked out of place against the sterile linoleum of the pediatric ward. When he walked into the waiting room, the atmosphere shifted. My parents, who had been berating me for ruining Michelle's reputation, suddenly switched frequencies. They went from aggressors to victims in the span of a heartbeat. Susan rushed toward him, hands fluttering. Tyler, thank God you're here. It's been a nightmare. Brianna has completely overreacted. She called the police over a simple mix-up with the Uber. Michelle is beside herself. Tyler didn't look at her. He looked at me. His face was pale, his eyes scanning the room for his children. Where are they? He asked. His voice was quiet, stripped of any patience. They're sleeping, I said. Ethan is on a nebulizer. Sophia is in shock. He walked past my mother as if she were a ghost. He went into the room where the kids were resting. Through the open door, I watched him stand over Ethan's bed. He stared at the oxygen mask, at the pile of warming blankets. He reached out and touched Sophia's hair, his hand trembling. He stayed there for 5 minutes. When he came back out, he looked different. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. He looked at my father. You knew. Richard sputtered. Now, Tyler, let's not cast blame. Michelle made a mistake, but she's under a lot of pressure. She sent them to a construction site. Tyler cut him off. I just read the police report on the nurse's station desk. She sent them to a condemned lot in negative 10-degree weather because she was rushing to a retreat I told her we didn't need to spend money on. It was an accident, my mother pleaded. It was negligence, Tyler said. And you're defending it. He turned to me. I had braced myself for him to join their ranks to defend his wife, to protect the family image. Instead, he asked a single question. Do you have proof? I nodded. I have the recording of her call. I have the text messages where she refused to verify the address. I have the timestamp of when she booked the ride versus when her flight departed. Send it all to me, he said. Tyler, you can't be serious, my mother gasped. You're going to side with her. She hates Michelle. She's always been jealous. Get out, Tyler said. It wasn't a scream. It was a dismissal. He didn't look at them. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number I recognized immediately, the private line of the most aggressive family law firm in Chicago. My parents stood there, mouth agape, realizing their influence had just evaporated. They tried to argue, but Tyler simply turned his back on them. Go, or I'll have security remove you. They left, casting hateful glances at me, muttering about betrayal. Once they were gone, the silence in the hallway was heavy. Tyler sat down next to me. He put his head in his hands. I didn't know, he whispered. She told me you bailed. She texted me right before takeoff saying you claimed you were sick and she had to scramble. I thought she hired a nanny service. She lied, I said. I know. He looked up and I saw the resolve hardening in his eyes. I'm done, Brianna. I've been paying for the lifestyle, the trips, the brand. I thought I was supporting her dreams. I was funding my children's neglect. He stood up. I'm filing for full custody. And I'm filing for a forensic audit of our accounts. I want to know where every cent went. Will you help me? I looked at the man who had been a passive observer for years, finally waking up to the wreckage in his home. I'll send you the files, I said. The next morning, we weren't just family. We were co-belligerents in a war for survival. We met at the law offices of Sterling and Vance. The conference room was glass and steel overlooking the freezing city. I laid out my digital evidence folder like a blueprint. Every screenshot, every recording, every timeline was categorized. The lead attorney, a woman named Harper who looked like she ate narcissists for breakfast, reviewed the file. This isn't just a custody case, she noted, tapping the police report. This is criminal negligence. If we proceed with this, Michelle could face charges. Are you prepared for that? Tyler didn't flinch. I protect my children, he said. I sat back, watching the legal fortress being built around Sophia and Ethan. My parents thought they could bully me into silence. Michelle thought she could charm her way out of consequences. They didn't realize that by pushing me too far, they hadn't just made an enemy. They had created a witness who kept receipts. The discovery process is a quiet kind of violence. It lacks the screaming of a hospital waiting room or the flashing lights of a police cruiser. Instead, it is the soft click of a mouse and the rustle of printed paper in a high-rise conference room. 2 weeks after the incident, we were seated in Harper's office. The forensic audit of the rideshare data had just come in. Harper slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table toward Tyler and me. "Look at the destination input," she said. I looked. The log showed the request time, 8:42 a.m. It showed the pickup location, Michelle's luxury condo. And then, it showed the destination entry. Michelle hadn't typed in an address. She hadn't manually entered 847 North Lakeshore Drive. She had simply selected a saved favorite labeled Brianna. The coordinate associated with that label was 847 South Lakeshore Drive. I stared at the numbers and the air left the room. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't a GPS glitch or a driver error. It was a memory. "I haven't lived at 847 South Lakeshore Drive in 4 years," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. That building was my first apartment out of grad school. It was a rundown walk-up in a neighborhood that was slated for demolition. I moved out the day I got my license. I bought my condo on the north side, my dream home, 3 years ago. I hosted a housewarming party. I hosted Thanksgiving there last year. I have sent change of address cards. I have sent calendar invites with the new location pinned. "Michelle was at your house for Christmas," Tyler said, his face gray. "She knows where you live." "She knows physically," I corrected, "but she doesn't know digitally. She never updated my contact in her phone." The realization settled over us like dust. Michelle hadn't just made a navigational error. She had revealed the absolute depth of her indifference. For 4 years, she had come to my home, eaten my food, and drank my wine, but she hadn't bothered to update the metadata of my existence in her life. To her, I wasn't a person with a changing life, a career, or a new home. I was just a static utility. I was Brianna, a function to be executed when needed. When she was rushing to make her flight, she didn't think, "Let me verify my sister's safety." She thought, "Click the button, send the package, get to the retreat." "This changes everything," Harper said, her pen tapping rhythmically against the file. "This proves depraved indifference. It dismantles her defense that this was a simple mistake. A mistake is typing a wrong number. Sending your children to a building that has been condemned for 2 years because you couldn't be bothered to update a contact file, that is willful negligence." I looked at the piece of paper, the digital footprint of my sister's narcissism. It didn't make me angry. It made me feel erased. It confirmed what I had suspected since we were children but never wanted to admit. Michelle didn't see me. She never had. I was just an NPC in her main character energy, a background asset that was supposed to remain in place until called upon. Tyler took the paper from my hand. He folded it carefully like he was folding a flag at a funeral. "She sent them to a ghost," he said. "This is the smoking gun," Harper declared. "When we present this to the judge, she won't just lose custody. She'll lose her standing to argue she's a competent parent at all." I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, seeing the distance between the south side and the north side, the distance between who I was and who my sister thought I was. "File it," I said. "Use it." We weren't just proving she was a bad mother. We were proving that to Michelle, the people around her weren't real. And you can't entrust children to someone who lives in a solipsistic fantasy. The ghost address was the final nail in the coffin of our sisterhood, and I was ready to swing the hammer. The emergency custody hearing happened 72 hours later. Michelle arrived dressed for a Vogue cover shoot, a camel trench coat, oversized sunglasses, and a blowout that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She swept into the courtroom as if she were greeting fans at a meet and greet, flashing a dazzling practice smile at the bailiff. She truly believed her charm was a form of currency here. She thought she could smile, cry, a single perfect tear, and explain that she was just a working mom doing her best. Her lawyer, a slick man who clearly specialized in high-conflict divorces, opened with a speech about parental rights and the bond between mother and child. He tried to paint me as a jealous spinster, a woman with no children of her own who was trying to steal her sister's family out of envy. I sat in the witness box, hands folded, watching the performance. It was impressive in a grotesque way. Then Harper stood up. She didn't make a speech. She didn't use adjectives. She simply projected the rideshare log onto the screen. "Mrs. Brennan," Harper asked, "can you confirm this is the address you entered into the app on the morning of January 14th? Michelle glanced at the screen, bored. "Yes. That's my sister's address." "Is it?" Harper asked. "Or is it the address of a property your sister sold 3 years ago?" The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It wasn't a pause. It was a vacuum. Michelle blinked. Her smile faltered just for a second before she tried to recover. Well, I must have clicked the wrong one. It's an easy mistake. Harper clicked to the next slide. It showed a timeline of communication. Emails, calendar invites, change of address cards, a photo of Michelle standing in my new living room at Christmas holding a glass of wine. You have been to your sister's current home 6 times in the last year, Harper noted. You have received 12 notifications of her new address, and yet when the safety of your children depended on it, you sent them to a location you hadn't visited since before your youngest child was born. Michelle looked at her lawyer. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet her eyes. I was rushing, Michelle snapped, her voice rising. I had a flight to catch. I'm building a brand. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? And there it was. The mask slipped. The devoted mother vanished, replaced by the narcissist who was inconvenienced by her own children's existence. The judge, a woman who looked like she had raised 5 children and tolerated zero nonsense, leaned forward. Brennan, are you telling this court that your brand took precedence over verifying the location of your children in sub-zero temperatures? Michelle opened her mouth to argue, to spin, to deflect. But the judge cut her off. Custody is stripped immediately, the judge ruled. Mr. Brennan is awarded full legal and physical custody. Mrs. Brennan is granted supervised visitation only pending a psychological evaluation and completion of a parenting course. My mother stood up in the gallery. You can't do this. She's a good mother. This is a witch hunt. Bailiff, remove that woman, the judge ordered without looking up. I watched as my parents were escorted out, still shouting about injustice. I watched Michelle crumple, not with grief, but with the shock of someone who has never been told no in her entire life. And I felt nothing. No triumph. No joy. Just the quiet, heavy relief of a structure that has finally stopped shaking. The collapse was over. The rebuilding could begin. 6 months later, the dust has settled not into a pile of debris but into a foundation. Michelle is living with our parents in their guest room. Her brand evaporated the moment the court transcripts became public record. It turns out sponsors do not like to associate with documented child endangerment. She spends her days posting vague victim-blaming quotes on private accounts that have 40 followers. My parents are miserable, trapped in a house with the monster they created and refuse to discipline. They call me occasionally, leaving voicemails about forgiveness and healing. I don't delete them, I archive them. They are reminders of why the locks on my door will never change back. Tyler sold the luxury condo. He bought a brownstone 3 blocks from my place. It doesn't have a view of the skyline, but it has a backyard and a high-efficiency air filtration system for Ethan. We have dinner together every Sunday. It isn't a performance. There are no cameras, no ring lights, no staged moments for the grid. It is just pasta, homework, and the quiet, steady rhythm of safety. Last week I watched Ethan run around the backyard. It was 40 degrees, but he was bundled up in a coat, hat, and scarf. He wasn't wheezing. Sophia was sitting on the steps reading a book, not looking over her shoulder to see if she needed to perform for a camera. That is my victory. It isn't the court order stamped with a judge's seal. It isn't the vindication of seeing Michelle face consequences. It is the sound of Ethan breathing without a struggle. For a long time I thought love was about endurance. I thought being a good sister meant absorbing the impact, taking the hits, and fixing the cracks. I thought family was a biological mandate, a contract signed in blood that you could never break. I was wrong. Biology is an accident. Safety is a choice. Love isn't about who you share DNA with. It is about who you feel safe closing your eyes around. It is about who remembers your address, not just as a GPS coordinate but as a place where you belong. By cutting Michelle out, I didn't break our family. I engaged in a structural renovation. I demolished the rotting beams and the unstable walls so that something real could stand in their place. I lost a sister, yes. But I gained a peace that is absolute. And looking at my nephew and niece safe and sound in a world that finally makes sense to them, I know I would burn that bridge again. I would burn it every single day just to keep them warm.